Hey guys, another One Take review. Today I wanted to talk about this year's first Tony Malaby album, The Cave of Winds. Now I know what you're thinking. Zane, this is an incredibly obscure oddball avant-garde jazz album that nobody cares about. Why are you making this video? No one's going to want to watch it. And you are correct. However, the one other album that I haven't listened to this year that I'm going to do a review on, the new Cult of Luna album, I don't feel like listening to it right now. And was kind of in a jazzy kind of mood, and I didn't really feel like searching out a new jazz album because no major jazz releases for the most part this year so far, and I listened to this last month and I liked it a lot, so I'm doing a video on it, and I'll get around to the Cult of Luna album, but for the time being, Tony Malaby, The Cave of Winds. Malaby himself is actually a saxophonist, and some more hardcore jazz fans might know him as a collaborator with people like Chris Lightcap and William Parker. Most of his more beloved works generally come from his solo career, though. On this record, he contributes, of course, both the alto and the tenor versions of his instrument. Although the very purposefully stiff and awkward performance style isn't going to be for everybody, just as free and avant-garde jazz itself isn't for everybody, I personally love Malaby's playing style here. I think he kind of creates a sort of mysterious sort of vibe overall that's just as chaotic as it is very, very beautiful. And in a period of the last few years that has been a very underrated time for just generally experimental jazz, I do think this is some of the best saxophone work, at least that I've heard so far from the genre within recent years. Also featured on The Cave of Winds is the guitarist Ben Monder. Monder is definitely most famous for working on none other than David Bowie's Black Star, which was, of course, a masterpiece of Bowie's career, his final album before his unfortunate passing, and just an emotionally devastating record that I'm sure I'll end up talking about at some point because I absolutely love that album. And he did a very great job performing on that album. But I will say that I'm much more mixed in my opinion about how he performs on The Cave of Winds. My main issue with Monder's performance isn't actually his performance itself. He actually performs well enough considering what the record is. It's just the fact that The Cave of Winds, as far as mixing and production goes, kind of makes the guitar sound very submerged in water almost, and it's kind of strange, and I'm going to go with it on purpose because, again, this is a free jazz album. I mean, really, just the entire genre itself, anything can happen in it, and it won't be on accident. I'm sure, there's an album out there where they just, like, pop off fireworks in the studio, and then they recorded the studio burning down and everybody screaming, and then they were like, here's the album. That's just what free jazz is as a genre, honestly. So it's most likely purposeful, I'm assuming, I'm hoping, but I do think it kind of, I don't know, it just kind of doesn't really work as well as it's supposed to. It just sort of hides the greatness of Ben Monder's playing, and he is actually a very, very talented guitarist. It's just that he is nowhere near as immediate as a performer as he's meant to be, at least in terms of sound. But if I'm ignoring the mixing and what the guitar sounds like, and I just go entirely on technical performance, he does very well here. Rounding out the four-piece that makes up the lineup of The Cave of Winds is the drummer Tom Rainey, as well as the bassist Michael Formanek. And I think that the rhythm section is always the part of jazz groups that interests me the most, besides the fact that I am a bassist and I am kind of almost legally obligated to be interested in any rhythm instruments. But I also think they're interesting because they can either be totally unnoteworthy or they can just completely steal the show. And there is rarely any in between. When something strikes me as far as rhythm instruments and jazz go, it really just blows me away. And there are also a lot of times where just bass, drums, piano at times, guitar at times, just really do not stand out whatsoever in any way. And there's nothing wrong with that. It can still be performed well. I just do think that the significance of the roles, or I shouldn't say significance, but prominence of the roles, really just is an interesting thing to study from album to album to album. I won't say that Rainey and Formanek are the highlights of the album, not highlight performers. That title obviously goes to Malaby himself, Tony Malaby. But I will say that they're very, at least fairly stand out as artists. I mean, they have a sort of very abstract playing style that almost isn't really exactly the way that you would expect rhythm instruments to be performed. especially with Michael Formanek doing his bass work, just sort of almost doing his own thing entirely, which is something I greatly respect and I think makes for a very interesting album overall. And you've got pieces here like a Recrudescence that are just almost disarmingly eerie because of the fact that the rhythm section is so off kilter in terms of what you're actually expecting as you go into this. And again, like I said, this is a free jazz album, so it's not like you're going into this expecting Miles Davis kind of blue era normalcy or anything like that. But still, it kind of makes for an interesting soundscape that you may have not been totally expecting, even if you already were expecting the fairly odd. Like I said, free jazz isn't for everybody. Experimental jazz in general isn't for everybody. Experimental music, period, is just not for everybody, whether it be rock or whatever. But at the same time, I do think that the Cave of Winds and Tony Malaby and Michael Formanek and the rest of the band's work here is weirdly accessible considering what it is. I mean, for such a musically abstract album, this record really does have a lot of very memorable compositions, and especially when that comes to the buildup of songs, uh, free jazz is something that can just be so chaotic, but the Cave of Winds just has songs that progress and build up so well that they're still free jazz because they still do feature that chaos, but they kind of almost take on a form of their own and do become very impactful pieces beyond the insanity that comes with the subgenre. And a lot of that is thanks to Tony Malaby himself. He did compose the majority of the record, and honestly, I do think that his compositional work here kind of makes the Cave of Winds a fairly standout release in a subgenre of jazz that may not actually be meant to have that many standout releases beyond the classics, like classic Cornet Coleman records, like The Shape of Jazz to Come. But my point is that this is a lot more memorable in terms of actual music than it probably should be or has any right to be, and it's all the better for it. So overall, The Cave of Wonders is a fantastic record. Probably Tony Malaby's best in a little while, if not one of his best in general. The only real issue I have with it is my sort of love-hate relationship with Ben Monder's guitar tone, but that's not really enough to complain about to warrant giving this a bad rating or anything like that. And overall, I think I want to give this album 4.5 stars out of 5. This is a really fantastic record, and I do think it's an early jazz must-listen for early 2022. And I think that anyone who is interested in free jazz, experimental jazz, avant-garde jazz, any jazz that isn't normal, just I would say listen to this. It's a good album. It's a good record. So yeah, 4.5 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that is the end of this review. So I will see you guys in the next video.